What do you think about when someone says safe supply? Are we talking about fentanyl-infused beer? Buy your meth at the liquor store or beside your favorite edibles? As a parent and person in recovery, I have my concerns about ideas like this, and I hope you do too. With the harms brought to our communities by alcohol far surpassing all illicit drug harms combined, is this really the benchmark we want to set for all substances? Some political parties in Canada are bent on destroying all things harm reduction, so I think now more than ever we need to paint a clear picture of what a regulated supply of substances like fentanyl could look like here in Canada, and how we can use it to bring people who struggle onto a path towards wellness and into a safer and more productive way to live. I'm Daniel Hearn, along with Donna Gilchrist and Dr. Barbara Fornsler, coming at you live from the CMHA Provincial Conference, Resilience in a Changing World, and...
This is Hard Knocks Talks.
All right, we are live. What's going on, everybody? My name is Daniel Unmanageable, and this is Hard Knocks Talks, coming at you from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Treaty Number 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis people. With us today, we have Dr. Barbara Fornsler. We have the lovely Donna on the mod station, taking care of anybody who's watching online. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, drop us a comment. Let us know your thoughts on anything that we're going to talk about today. Hopefully we'll have a chance to get to everyone. There's also a microphone in the audience there. We will do our best to get to any comments that might come in or questions. But for now, let's bring in Barb. This is weird, just like actually sitting right beside you. And
I know.
I made it so that we're actually looking at each other on the screens.
I like that. I like that tech effect. Good morning, everyone. It's great to see everyone here this morning. And thank you so much for having me down and Donna on the show. It's always such a privilege to sit with you all and have conversations about really important topics in our community.
Yeah. And thanks for being here today. Thank you for being such an integral support, helping us navigate the mountain that is academia.
Yes.
You are our Sherpa on that mountain, to say the very least.
Thank you. Yeah, that mountain just keeps getting higher. It's you think you've reached the top, and then you look up, and there's more to go. So
and then you get to that one, and then there's another one.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So, anyways, let's dive in. Let's do this thing here. So, in the clip at the beginning, I kind of ragged pretty hard on the regulation of alcohol.
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. What do you think when people or advocates try to come to a place where they're looking at the regulation of alcohol as the benchmark to what they would like to see what are now known as illicit substances be in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, this whole topic is, as you mentioned in the description and in the intro, this is a growing conversation in Canada, right? How are we going to approach this idea, safer supply, and what that means overall? It is relatively new as an idea. And I think it's, for some people, the first time they've maybe heard about it. When I was at a conference in November in Portugal last year, I used the term safe supply and had a number of folks say, what does that mean? And so I think that's what we're really trying to unpack today in the conversation is what does that mean? How does it compare to things like the regulation around alcohol and other substances that are currently not illicit? And what might that look like if we changed our approach to substance use policy and regulation in Canada? So like many things in substance use, we're going to hear polar extremes, basically, right? So we've got some folks who are saying no rules, no regulation, and we've got other folks saying we've got to criminalize this, we've got to enact the harshest possible penalties. And we're probably going to land somewhere in the middle at the end of the day.
So what do you think when you hear people asking for, and what I've coined, unfettered access, you know, like when we talk about seeing these things maybe in not unlike pot shops that we currently have, you know, it's almost like they're glamorizing these different substances, you know, like the packaging is very flashy and appealing. They have different flavors. Like when I think grape flavored meth, I mean, that doesn't really sit comfortably with me.
No.
And I think that might be maybe a misnomer that's being presented in our society. Like when we're talking safe supply, I mean, personally, as a parent and a person in recovery, I mean, I got started on opioids from my diverted supply, right? And then when that couldn't support me, I went to the street. You know, so what is your thoughts on that when someone comes across and says we would like to see just like open access?
Unfettered access. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a response to a lot of the barriers that people encounter when they are trying to access services and health supports in our system today. So, one of the big concerns has been, can I access the service and support that I actually require, whether that's housing, food provision, different forms of treatment or substitution therapies, or in this case, access to a supply of their substance abuse that is not potentially contaminated and toxic with basically where people are being poisoned because they don't know what is in their substance abuse. And that is driving a lot of the harms that we're seeing right now in Canada. Overall, what are we reducing the harm from at the end of the day? And right now, we're trying to reduce the harm from the toxic supply that's going on. So there are a bunch of different models. So this unfettered access, no, I don't think we really have that with many substances. I think we could have stronger regulatory frameworks with alcohol and tobacco. We've made those changes. When the vaping companies started advertising, and they had grape and bubblegum flavor and all that, we said, wait a minute, who are you marketing this to? And brought in legislation. Now, unfortunately, some of that legislation, it's on the tails of private industry who are trying to make a profit. So we've got industry interests at the table. Then we've got health regulation that's happening through policy, and quite often that's behind what's actually going on in the commercial market. So we need our policymakers to basically accelerate or speed up and try and get ahead of these things, much like we see with internet communications bills that are going on and things like that. It's hard for these big ships in policy to turn quickly and to pivot with a private market. So I think that's going to be something that we need to talk about as a public overall, is sort of how do we want to see this regulated? What provisions are going to protect our communities while still providing that access that I think a lot of people are speaking to when they say, hey, when I need my substance abuse, my life, like I shouldn't be risking my life to have my substance abuse. And frankly, we can control the dose amount and that sort of stuff when we are providing a supply to individuals who are dependent on a substance. It's also less likely that we're going to see those immediate acute harms from a regulated supply, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, with a regulated supply and access to it through a medical model, do you think that we would see a reduction in the harms brought to community due to, what some would call drug-seeking behavior or as a result of perhaps psychosis?
This is absolutely, and I think one of the things we can do is really so. At the end of the day, we know that many people are seeking to what they often call self-medicate when they're dependent on a substance. Right? There's something that doesn't feel good, and the substance abuse helps them feel better. So really, what we're seeing when folks are using drugs is that they're not feeling well. When they're using them in a harmful way, it's that is providing some relief from from other things that they're experiencing in their life, past traumas, current situations, that kind of stuff. So when we recognize that trauma is a lot of the root of substance dependence, that unaddressed trauma, undiagnosed concerns around mental health, and lack of support overall, penalizing folks, using this sort of jail or bust approach, this war on drugs approach has been massively unsuccessful, and it is driving those additional community harms. If you have to spend 10 hours a day seeking your substance of use, your whole life is consumed by that chaos. In some early pilot studies that we're seeing now, we're finding when we can alleviate that burden, when someone doesn't have to spend 8 to 10 hours a day seeking their substance of use to avoid the sickness of withdrawal, they can focus on other things. They can engage counseling, engage different services, and go to appointments. And basically, the goal is to stabilize the individual in their life so that it's no longer chaos and they're not having to do things like, break into vehicles, commit petty theft, those kinds of things to meet their need to avoid that withdrawal.
For 8 to 10 hours a day.
Yeah. And, and suddenly when you have that 8 to 10 hours a day of time back, maybe you can think about things like reconnecting with family, talking with friends, engaging in different programs and services, maybe rejoining the workforce, maybe being able to basically participate in society because your life is not consumed in that chaos of seeking your substance of use. And that's going to be the primary reduction of harm, I think, along with the reduction in drug toxicity deaths. Now, it's not to say that prescription medications or legal substances don't cause harms. They absolutely do. But similar to saying, I've heard some conversations lately where folks are sort of saying, oh, well, people still die, so harm reduction doesn't work. And frankly, it's a false narrative. we still use seatbelts. People still die in car accidents. That is a terrible thing. But less people die in car accidents when we wear seatbelts, right? So seatbelts are a harm reduction, and we've accepted that as a society. And people were very angry when that seatbelt legislation came in. There's still videos online, about people saying this is about my liberty and my freedom. They were very offended. But now, we've sort of seen, hey, actually, there are big benefits from wearing that seatbelt. And suddenly it's less scary and less imposing, and it's more about keeping ourselves and our families safe when we're traveling in motor vehicles. We're not banning motor vehicles, right?
It's about harm reduction, not harm elimination.
Yes.
No one ever stood up and said we are going to solve addiction by offering a safe supply.
No, and that's the other thing. We hear a lot of people saying, "Well, it's not a silver bullet," and I'm like, I don't think anyone ever said it was, and it is going to take a multi-pronged approach to address this concern in our country, right? So we've heard conversations around decriminalization, around safe supply, accompanying that decriminalization. We know that the justice system is not the best place to find healing. And we don't want those kinds of punitive approaches coming back, because that stigma actually drives people away from health services and supports. It makes them feel alienated and disconnected from our society. And when we do that to folks, they feel bad, and as a response, often use more substances. So if we really sort of want to address this problem, we're going to have to take that multi-pronged approach. Housing, decriminalization, safe supply, and opportunities for treatment for those who choose to pursue it. So overall, it's hard to get those four sectors working together. But at the end of the day, substance use is a health concern first and foremost that we need to address from that lens, rather than through a justice lens like we've been doing over the last, since the war on drugs initiated, since we started legislating through justice mechanisms around the control of substances. We do want regulated substances in this country. We have lots of regulation around food products, around, the things we buy in stores, so on and so forth. And that is to protect community and public health. So I'm in favor of regulation. I don't like seeing, our money, in a sense, going to our community's money, going into networks of individuals, whether they're gangs or organized crime and these sorts of things, however you want to classify that. But basically, it's not a tax base that we can draw from, and it is causing more harm in our community. These folks who are currently in control of the drug trade, public health is certainly not their first concern. And I would like to see this in the hands of policymakers, where community well-being is their first concern.
So what does that look like then, if we're going to regulate a supply under a medical model? Now people are going to raves. Weekend warriors are going to raves, they're going to festivals. Certainly they're going to, many of them, I think it's pretty safe to assume that there is a lot of dope at these events. What would a regulated supply do to help these people get something that they know is going to, they know what to expect? And what does that look like as far as not necessarily reducing the perception of harm while you're doing it?
Absolutely. Well, and I think at the end of the day, one of the, as I mentioned already, sort of the greatest harm we're seeing is that people don't know what they're taking, right? So they think they're buying cocaine or something, but it turns out there's carfentanil in there, and that is deadly. And so they're not able to adequately control the dose or the amount that they're using. So amount and frequency of use are two of the main indicators that we often use to discuss whether or not a substance of use is harmful or causing harm in someone's life. And basically, when you don't know what you're buying, you can't control that dose amount. So I think one of the immediate benefits that we'd see is that people would know how much they're taking. And they would be able to hopefully gauge their tolerance through their frequency of use and that sort of stuff, to understand sort of the impact that it's going to have. In the same way that, folks now in the audience generally would know whether they engage the use of alcohol or not, the difference between drinking a 40 of vodka and having a beer. Right? We can regulate what's that impact going to be. And we can't do that with substances that are not regulated, that are produced in clandestine laboratories, as they call them. I always think of a scientist, on a hill with lightning bolts behind them when I hear clandestine laboratory. But at the end of the day, we don't have appropriate equipment in these facilities, and so on and so forth. So it increases the risk of harm. And we saw these increased harms as well during the era of prohibition around alcohol. There were immediate toxicity deaths. There were immediate harms like blindness and other things that accompanied the use of that alcohol that was not manufactured manufactured in a regulated environment, and it caused additional harm. Now, is alcohol regulation perfect in Canada? Gosh, no, not at all. And
I mean, when I go to a family event, like a
Mhm.
family sporting event, and I see giant inflatable beer cans and people driving around in golf carts serving alcohol, and my children are seeing this, and I mean that really sends a message that this substance is safe and acceptable,
Right.
you know, and the thought of other substances being made available in that same way, quite honestly, as a parent, it would not be acceptable to me.
Mhm.
So how would people access a regulated supply for such
Totally.
things as they're going to an event, they're going to
Yeah.
whatever? Like, what is that? Do they have to go to the doctor? Like, what do
Right.
you think that should look like?
Well, and under a medical model, in a sense, yes, it would be largely a prescription supply. And we actually have the capacity to do this right now in the country, where a medical provider can write a script for an individual who is seeking a substance of use. Not all substances of use that we deem illicit are have an equivalent that is manufactured in proper pharmaceutical labs. But generally speaking, you can get medical grade heroin, you can have medical grade fentanyl. These are available. Fentanyl has been used as a pain relief, pain management tool for post-surgical pain management for many, many years. When we have a substance like fentanyl that is appropriately regulated and delivered in conversation with health professionals, we don't see these kinds of harms. When it is hidden in somebody's bag of something that they think is something else, suddenly we see, yes, drug toxicity deaths and excessive harm. So at the end of the day, right, we want to ensure that people know what they're taking. And that is really what it's going to do. So some folks have proposed unfettered access, some of the advocates, as you said. And that might come in the form of compassion clubs, or basically a group of people who are buying a substance.
What's a compassion club?
Oh, a compassion club is basically a way to share the purchase of a substance of use for purposes of, how do I put it? It's really hard to give an academic definition of a compassion club, and it's that, but really, we're alleviating harm, basically, or dependence. So we saw this. We saw compassion clubs with cannabis, particularly around terminal diagnoses early on, before it became more common in medical use. But basically, a substance might provide relief for certain symptoms that an individual is experiencing, and often groups of people experiencing that same concern might come together and, say, purchase their substance of use from a source that is not legal. And then in the case of, say, the Drug User Liberation Front, the model that they're putting forward in Vancouver is basically, we're going to bulk buy, we're going to test this substance, and then we're going to distribute to our members so that we know what is in this substance of use. And that is one way to protect people from that toxicity. I would like to see that process happening not only from individuals who are particularly motivated to do that kind of extra work and extra homework around the substances that they're using and sharing with others, but to have our communities basically able to do that. And that's where we see pharmacies stepping in, right? So in a medical model, right now, doctors can prescribe most substances of use if they should choose to. And there is a national safer supply community of practice for medical providers. You can just Google it, National Safe Supply community of practice. And these are medical providers coming together to try and discuss what sort of parameters should be around this prescription practice. We saw this work successfully during the pandemic, where we had, they called it pandemic prescribing, but basically, as part of our public health orders, not wanting people to be in contact and so on, and keeping that physical distance, not having to go to the pharmacy every day, we saw a big increase in the number of prescriptions provided to people who are substance dependent. And we didn't see the four horsemen of the apocalypse come riding in. Things did work out, like more or less. Is everything always going to be perfectly safe? No. But is it a lot safer than the toxic market? Yes. So I think what we're going to end up with at the end of the day is for folks who are I think we're going to see a combo model. So we've got, in BC right now, we've got a pilot study happening around decriminalization of up to 2.5 cumulative grams.
That's a lot of fentanyl.
And that would be in many, yes, a lot of fentanyl. Especially for me, because I'm a naive person, right? Like I don't have any tolerance for that substance. But how do we write a one-size-fits-all drug policy when we have so many different kinds of use, right? So I think we're going to have a nuanced policy, and I know our societies don't really like nuanced policies. We like all or nothing, one end of the spectrum or the other. And I think what we're going to have is a threshold amount, whether that's 2.5 grams or lower, for the general public. And then for those who are dependent or requiring more, we're going to see, hopefully, connection with healthcare providers to write them a prescription that would allow them then legally to go above that threshold amount for the general population.
Oh, hang on a sec. Now, if anyone has any questions or comments or anything, please just step up to the mic and we will get to you at the earliest convenience. Faith?
Oh,
I
great.
do. So it's
Please.
interesting. So you're talking about a safe supply for the general public and not just for people for whom that they need those substances. So are we talking safe supply about fentanyl and all of the drugs, which those are actually legal drugs, right? But what about meth and the other things?
Absolutely. And thank you for that question. I think what we've often seen, though, in the world of substance use research is that many people are using illicit substances due to underlying undiagnosed mental health concerns, due to stressors in their life or underlying traumas that are not addressed. We are seeing promising research around some of the ADHD medications as a substitution therapy for stimulant use. Or illicit stimulant use. And there's some early studies suggesting that this may be a really great way forward and out of that illicit market. Not enough practitioners. I don't think enough clinical studies have gone on. There is one planned from the Canadian Research Initiative in Substance Misuse. We'll be doing a national clinical trial trying to address that, sort of how can we have sort of substitution therapies that might assist people in leaving that illicit market. And at the same time, one of the difficulties with substitution therapies, and this is a key distinction, safe supply provides all the psychoactive benefits of that substance abuse that an individual might be seeking. Substitution therapy simply prevents withdrawal pain. So you're not going to feel dope sick or sick in your withdrawal. That's what a substitution therapy like methadone or Suboxone is doing, whereas a safer supply is providing the psychoactive benefits as well as that withdrawal management. So in a regulated environment. So if folks were saying, hey, I would like to use methamphetamine because of these additional impacts that it has, we would then, with a safe supply model, we would support that, hopefully with a known substance, where it could be manufactured in a proper laboratory where we're not going to see that contamination of other substances or non-substances that shouldn't be consumed and so on. So we're going to try and eliminate those harms. And then at the same time, meet that individual's need for their substance. And hopefully in that contact, in that connection of speaking with people, of not shaming and stigmatizing people, we're going to instill a sense of value and a sense of care from this community, from all our communities. You are not to be cast out because you use substances. In fact, we see this as a symptom of you feeling bad in the world, and we want to bring you into the circle of care. And that really is the goal.
Faith?
Sure. No.
Oh, can you maybe something I'm off the cuff here? Maybe introduce yourself because we don't have a camera on you.
Alrighty.
Okay.
So I'm Faith Bodner, CMHA Saskatchewan. Such a fascinating conversation. I'm reminded when we legalized marijuana, and I'm no expert, but I have teenage kids, so just so you know, I have some experience, and also with alcohol in the same regard. So what the decriminalization of marijuana taking so long, what it did was it stopped the study of the good uses of it.
Yes.
And it's been around for thousands of years, and people have used it for thousands of years. The other thing around safe supply and just access to drugs and to a therapeutic model is I have a sister with advanced MS, and she uses hydromorphone to manage her pain.
Yes.
And when all of this kind of tightened up a few years ago, they made her feel like a drug addict, right? Which she was, but this was something she felt shameful and stigmatized by by the use. And then the last thing I wanted to say, and then I'll sit down, is that many people end up on substance abuse, or you use substance use, which I like. So I'm trying to adapt my language.
It's all good. We're all learning.
I'm trying to adapt my language, but through medical conditions, and so people are cast out of the hospital on some very powerful drugs, and then all of a sudden those drugs run out, and what do they do? So
right?
Mm.
No, and these are important concerns and considerations. And I think, how do I put it? We're really early in this conversation, but I think especially, in a conference like this, many people here can appreciate that sometimes to be at our best, we might need some medications. We might find a better baseline of stability in our lives with medication provision and with that healthcare provided. So, how do I put this? I really want to see our health system and our folks who are working so hard in our community and advocates coming together. Stacey Swampview once said to me, rather than seeing people as good or bad, we need to see them as healthy or hurting. And when we're seeing folks using substances to cope with the traumas in their life, to cope with the stressors in their life, we need to see them as hurting. These are not bad people. They're not evil people. They're not like this whole moralization through the war on drugs has been a huge problem, a huge driver of stigma, and it pushes people away from care and it pushes our whole society away from these conversations that we need to be having, right? What should safe supply look like in Saskatoon versus in Vancouver? Maybe we need different models, right? Maybe we need different approaches to care. But we're never going to get there if we can't have this conversation because of the stigma involved, right? Yes, please.
Yeah, sorry. Just what you were saying before, you're talking a lot about like it seems like people are really more comfortable with talking about safe supply in a medical prescription model. So I'm wondering, how does that work? Like, what's the conversation around then you get your prescription? How do you pay to get your prescription filled?
Yes.
Because obviously insurance is not going to want to cover people's meth prescriptions. And if it gets into more general public use, like what's
Right.
the conversation around how that could possibly look, especially when it pivots quickly and a lot of people who are, like you say, are spending their entire days searching for their substance of use right now. People don't have that money to be buying, like when we think about what prescriptions cost in a medical model, when you
Right.
don't have coverage, they're very expensive. So I'm just curious about, about that.
Exactly. No, great question. And this is where we can get into some of the nuance around this policy because we're able to have the
If I
conversation.
might just
Jump in, Dan. Absolutely.
if we're talking about a medical model, if we're talking about someone who's having substance use challenges, and now this is just through my lens of lived experience, I think that should be something that I would hope would be covered by our healthcare system. Now, if we're talking about a regulated supply to ensure people aren't getting in harm's way at festivals or at wherever that is, I think that is an opportunity for us to bring stability to the healthcare system. There's taxation there that we can use to offset some of the costs of bringing wellness to the people who actually need it for medical reasons.
And we did see, I think it's a really great question because we did see with cannabis, right, earlier medical use when prescribed could be with prescription benefit programs and things like that could be received for no cost to that individual when it was deemed important for medical use. However, when it was not seen as a medical use, yes, you were still paying. Once it was legalized, people were then paying money for it. But you can still access those prescription supports, and I think that would be an incredibly important element to have within a prescription supply kind of program to ensure that access again, right? We're coming back to that access question. If you don't have the money to buy the prescription, how are we going to ensure that you have access?
Yeah, because that's what I'm wondering with like. So with cannabis, often it was being prescribed if you had a physical diagnosable illness.
Yep.
And when we're talking about people that are legitimately trying to cope and live with their traumas, that's harder to diagnose and then say, yeah, you can legitimately get a prescription that's covered.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, that's kind of what I'm curious about.
Enhancing mental health knowledge of our health practitioners, I think, is an ongoing concern and goal. I know we ask our medical professionals to know everything all the time, and so ability to refer to specialists and folks who have better training and background in specific areas like prescription supply, I think is going to be a really important aspect of facilitating this and moving this policy forward in a way that can meet the needs of the general public and also folks facing substance dependence or harmful use overall, and ensuring that our system isn't denying access to individuals who may need that support. So it's again, that's another great area of policy that will absolutely have to accompany this conversation as we go forward. It's not something that we're going to immediately enact tomorrow, right? It took almost 15 years of conversation from 2005 onward to, so in 2005, a Senate Standing Committee recommended that cannabis be legalized for everyone over the age of 16 in Canada. So that was their recommendation in 2005. Fast forward many years, many conversations later, and finally we were ready as a country to have a conversation about the regulatory framework that could accompany the legalization of cannabis. And I think right now we're just at that very beginning, sort of, hey, early research is showing this could be an approach that makes our community safer, that protects people's health overall, and provides better access to health services and health supports. But what does that look like through all these different channels of policy? And those are going to be some important conversations ahead that I would love to see many health experts and particularly people with lived and living experience of substance use at the table shaping. What does that look like? Is it a barrier to go to a pharmacy every day? Based on substitution therapy, yes, it can be a huge barrier. So
we have a question coming in from Facebook.
Please.
Yes, from Facebook.
Hi, Facebook.
From Kathy Janess. She'd like to know, is meth use ever safe, even untainted? It causes so much harm from what I see.
The question was, is drug use ever safe?
Is meth use ever safe?
Is meth use ever safe?
Yes.
No, that's a difficult
Even
one.
untainted, because talking about the cleaner supply of.
No, yes. I mean, okay, so long question. No, no substances are ever inherently safe. If I drink too much water, it can kill me. So really what we're looking at is dose, amount, frequency of use, these kinds of measures. Life is risky, right? We live in a risky world. I could step out into the street without looking and bus, right? So there's a lot of risk that we're navigating in our everyday lives. And the best way to help navigate that risk is with thorough information available to individuals, right? So if the risk of using a particular substance is above your threshold and you're not comfortable with that, no, don't use it. If you are comfortable and saying, hey, I want to weigh my risks, maybe I want to use a stimulant this weekend while I'm out at a party or going to the club, what a regulated market or a prescription market, some kind of not illicit market could do is provide access to the information that people need to better protect their health and well-being. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be better than what we have now.
Got a question coming in. Please introduce yourself. So there's no mic on you, camera.
Hi.
Oh, thank you.
My name is Lisa Bradford. I work at Crocus Cooperative downtown here in Saskatoon.
Great.
Just want to say I love the idea of providing a safe supply. But I guess kind of question or concern would be a lot of our people, we refer to them as members that we serve, they don't have access or feel comfortable accessing a general practitioner. So under this model, I know access has been a huge kind of word that we've been using, but realistically, whether it's due to feeling unsafe approaching a general practitioner or just not having simply enough in our city, even for those of us who are more privileged and can drive to any ends of the city to get what we need. In that case, obviously, we know that's not a lot of the people who would be needing to use the safe supply to prevent, detrimental harm to themselves. I'm just wondering if that's something that's been considered and what the thoughts around that are. Thank you.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for that excellent question. It's really important. Access is continually a question, I think, in the world of health provision, in substance use services. And it's going to continue to be a question until we're able to better offer that wraparound care. But to your, I think the core of that question, though, is that stigma that people feel and that fear that people feel in trying to have an open conversation about their substance use with a healthcare provider. And it doesn't help at all when we have leadership, both federally and provincially, talking about things like involuntary treatment. What is involuntary? Forced. It's forced. You didn't volunteer. You're being mandated to go. So let's not call it involuntary. Let's call it forced treatment and see how that sounds, right? These are punitive approaches, frankly, and we need to If we want to eliminate that stigma, and if we want to provide better access, not only in programming hours and these sorts of things, but we need to establish trust between care providers and people who use substances so that they can disclose their use, so that they can have that conversation with care providers in a non-judgmental environment and without the threat of coerced treatment. So allow for this system to meet people where they're at. We're hearing a lot of concern around the predominance of harm reduction. Really, harm reduction has only been a pillar in our federal health policy since 2015. This has not been a long time. The war on drugs has had a lot longer to demonstrate its outcomes. We've seen those harmful outcomes. And much like I said around decriminalization and conversations last year, we're literally doing it so poorly that we're not going to make it worse, except if we increase that stigma by trying to force people into situations that they're not prepared to be in and that our system probably doesn't have capacity for anyway. So
what does that look like then? So if we're not going to coerce people into treatment, and I know like in my own experience, I've seen people come to a place where I think they may benefit from being removed from their ability to make decisions for a short time. You know, what and to force them into a place where it removes them from the capacity to use these substances or to demonstrate that behavior in the community. If we're not going to coerce them or basically lock them up until they find some clarity, what's the alternative?
wraparound care, telling people that they're valued and that they matter. Many folks are feeling disempowered and stigmatized when they are using substances, right? They're feeling low, they're feeling worthless, like they have no value. And to then strip the last possible choice they might have in life about whether or not to use drugs by forcing them into a facility of some kind and denying them that last minute shred of agency in their lives. You are not going to foster empowerment, care for self, so on and so forth. Then sobriety becomes a punishment, right? And it becomes something that is no, and that I'm reacting against and that I'm defiant against. So it's my view that people will choose things that are good for them when they value themselves, when they feel well, when they feel connected. And it's not just my view either. There is a lot of research supporting, this is where harm reduction literature really comes in from the evidence base. When people feel valued, that somebody cares if they show up tomorrow, they will choose to show up tomorrow because they matter. And that's the message we have not sent to people who use substances. You matter. You're important too, and you are part of this social fabric, and we want your voices here. We need to hear from those most affected by these policies about what impact these policies are having. And what we're hearing from groups like the Canadian Association of People Who Use Drugs and other advocacy groups is that this is the best pathway forward to reduce the harms and provide an opportunity to engage in a recovery pathway, whatever that might look like for that individual. You know, some definitions of recovery are abstinence from use. Other definitions of recovery are, I've recovered my quality of life again. I have a job. I'm connected to family.
I showed up to my supervised visits.
Yes.
I paid my rent.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. All of these kinds of contributions. And we need to celebrate every single step along the way. I'm truly convinced that if folks were not spending the majority of their time having to seek out their substance abuse, we would see immediate reduction in harms and an immediate change in our community.
Mm-hmm. I have a question.
Well, I just like to comment on the mandatory for somebody to go to treatment. I've been working in the outreach field for quite some time, and I feel that there's some people I like working with youth because, you know, when there's youth that struggle, you know, with substances and stuff like that, you can get a secure detox for them, so that they would have that. That knowledge that, you know, what kind of drugs they're struggling with, right?
Absolutely.
As for now that, you know, working with adults that never ever actually went to treatment or actually ever accessed the service, especially on First Nations too, it's like I honestly feel that, you know, some people, need to be mandatory to go to treatment because they'll have capacity issues, or we don't know their baseline out there. They might have underlying mental health issues. So I'm feeling that, if they did mandatory, specific cases where they know somebody is really needing, that support, then they should do that. Like some people don't even have family to actually, or family members that are educated in substance use and stuff. So that's where I'm coming from on that.
100%. Thank you so much for that comment. And I think it's really important that we acknowledge that there are already mechanisms in place in our legislation that when an individual is at extreme risk of doing harm to themselves or others, there are modes of intervention that can be enacted there. So I don't know if we need to add to that. I think we want to use that mechanism in very limited and specific cases, in the most extreme of cases where an individual is at extreme risk of harm. To clump all individuals who use substances into that group is not going to lead to good outcomes. At issue here is also questions of empowerment, our human rights frameworks, right? And we saw a lot of folks say, no, I won't be masked. I won't be told what to do during this pandemic, right? We felt very attacked and regulated, and we weren't being forced into an institution, right? As a society, that was like asking for keeping distance, not maybe gathering together the same way we would. And we saw a lot of fierce opposition to that because we want to have autonomy and we want to be able to make our own choices in the world as human beings. And it's my view that in public health and health services, we should be fostering that autonomy and fostering those decisions wherever we possibly can, with, yes, the understanding that there are rare and select situations where our society says it's important to protect this individual by intervening in that autonomy, but those really should be the exceptions to the rule and not the mode of governance generally.
And how it's enacted, how it's done.
Yes.
To be thrown in a jail cell or into cells for the weekend or anything like that. I mean, that sends a very powerful message to both community and to the person being
Yes, and what happens after that time as well. So if you're dealing with withdrawal for a period of 10 days or so and this kind of stuff, and then you're just released right back into the same situation that you were pulled out of, what we've actually done is increase your risk of drug toxicity and overdose. So because your threshold, your tolerance for use has come down during that time, we've done nothing else to support your success once you're out, and now we're just putting you back out there to do the same things, and it's more dangerous. So we're increasing the potential harm if we're not providing this wraparound stabilization and care. That's a concern.
One sec, we'll get to you.
Yeah.
But there's something I wanted to mention, and part of Donna's journey, I'd be so bold as to share part of it. She was in cells, and she went before a judge. I don't know when, but the judge asked her, like, are you struggling with substances? And Donna said, yes. And instead of the judge offering services, the judge says, okay, I'll let you go. And just, there you go.
Yes.
So, and I'm not going to assume I knew what was going through that judge's mind, but I think that with the level of knowledge around substance use, it would be safe to assume that the judge thought she was doing Donna a favor at the time. We're not going to lock you up, but we're also not really going to help you. We're just going to turn you loose.
Right. And this is where we need justice and health to
Yes.
come together with some good policies where that judge could say, hey, I'm going to refer you over to prairie harm reduction.
Yeah.
I'm going to refer you to this other service where you could access that, because no, your crime that you're in front of me for was not because, you're inherently greedy and evil. It's because you were seeking the means to meet your needs.
Seeking wellness.
So, right?
Basically,
Yeah.
at the end of the day.
Yes,
I said
100%.
at the end of the day.
I know. I said it too. And I've been trying not to say it. And every time I go to say it, I'm like, oh,
I was going to say,
Dan said not.
That's something that Barb does. She says that when she gets going, she'll say at the end of the day a lot. And at the beginning of the episode, I was going to say every time she says that, everyone go, oh, I forgot to say it. So, but now you're not going to be able to unhear it.
Patterns of speech, right? So I'll say in summary. Anyway,
Yeah.
thank
So
you.
we have a question.
Hi, my name is Jasmine. I work at Saskatoon Crisis Intervention Services. I know you've talked a lot about the dichotomy between justice and health. I wonder if you might want to touch on, the silos of addiction and mental health that we have in our health system, and maybe how you might think we might bridge that.
Right? Oh, 100%. So this has been an ongoing concern, right? Mental health and addictions were and are still kind of two separate streams. We're slowly bringing them together. Mental health and addictions is now a ministry kind of thing. So we're slowly seeing that come together. But basically what was happening for a long time is, folks facing substance dependence would present and say, hey, I need some assistance. And they'd say, well, the root of your substance use disorder is probably mental health. So we're going to send you over to the mental health services. Mental health services then says, but we can't really address that while you're concurrently using substances. So we're going to send you back over to the addictions counselor, and that ping pong effect happens, and the person just sort of gives up and ends up dropping out of the system, right? So we need to stop treating people like ping pong balls. And I think we have seen enhanced approaches where we're not addressing them separately. We're addressing both at the same time together because we have better training and capacity in our professional workforce in healthcare, where folks do have an understanding of substance use disorder and folks do have an understanding of mental health concerns, and they can bring that knowledge together to help meet this person's needs. So yes, it's been siloed. A lot of our systems are siloed in the Euro-Western world of colonial Canada, where we've segmented and shaped everything into these very narrow fields, and then we're not very good at talking to each other across those fields. So it's going to take a multi-sectoral effort, right? So yes, justice and health, yes, mental health and addictions. Basically, we need all the stakeholders and perspectives at the table, most importantly, people who use substances, to inform these conversations so that we can provide better pathways for folks who are seeking healing, seeking recovery, or simply seeking stabilization and dignity in their lives. Sorry, I see another microphone.
We have another comment. You guys are making my job easy today. Everyone's coming in hot with the comments.
I guess I just wanted to continue with that. From where I work and justice and that type of thing, how do we start to change sort of the perception of not just the people in this room, but other like the tax base, the greater society that might look at addictions through the lens of justice rather than wellness and empowerment, that type of thing. Earlier, your language from away from good and bad, healthy and hurting, to be able to sell that in a way of, more community models instead of just throwing more police at the problem. You know what I mean?
Oh, 100%.
How do we start to sell that?
Yes. Well, and I think it's about having these conversations where, we're talking about sort of like, what is going on when someone is criminalized, right? Like why do we deem that activity illegal, sort of thing? And we have seen some good initiatives, I think, in the justice system from restorative justice approaches, where we're recognizing that no individual is inherently criminal, right? We had these old sort of legacy ideas, particularly when we put a lot of our systems in place. And now we're trying to shift those big systems into different approaches that aren't about sort of inherent criminality and judging people and this kind of moralizing judgment, but instead we're saying, hey, maybe the justice system's role could actually be to say, this violated our social agreement, but we understand you did so because of these underlying reasons. So rather than, just incarcerating you, we're going to provide programs and services and skill building and some of that wraparound care and monitoring to support you in not violating those social norms and the law, as we call it, sort of thing, and hopefully removing punitive laws that aren't serving their purpose in a sense, that aren't affecting the change that we would like to see. I think a lot of folks, when we talk about the war on drugs, they'll say, oh yeah, that's ineffective. Like it's understood now that that's not going to bring about safety in our communities, happier, healthier spaces to live. But the question then is, well, so what are we going to do now? Like how do we do this differently? And this is a real opportunity, I think, for everyone in this room to ask that question. What are we going to do now? What should this look like? And yes, as citizens, as humans in the world who care about people, we should be having these conversations. And I know it's hard, it's scary, so I guess having courage to initiate those conversations, to even go for a coffee with someone who's in a similar role, someone who's in a different role as you, start having those conversations. What does this look like where you're at in the justice system versus where I'm at in public health versus where Dan's at with lived experience, and having these kinds of dialogues to understand other perspectives, snags that might come up in terms of access, in terms of sentencing, all of this sort of stuff. We've got to really unpack this. done a lot of harm with the way that we've approached this as a society, and we are going to spend some time undoing that harm and then hopefully putting in place systems that are not going to cause additional harm, but instead support people in their wellness overall. I hope that sort of addresses the question. It's big questions though, and I think it's important to have these kinds of questions and dialogue together.
Got another question coming in?
Hi, Lisa from Crocus here again.
thank you.
So this question kind of piggybacks off of the one that was just asked, and also kind of ties to the one that I asked earlier about accessing prescription safe, I don't want to call them drugs, substances for people. And I guess my question is not just like once we get past the society piece of learning to accept this and the justice piece and learning how to communicate within our community. One question, I guess, that kind of really sits with me is how I'm treated just by treating my ADHD through prescription substances, right? So I work in mental health, obviously. And one day I forgot my ID. Okay. And I've been using the same medication for months. It was 1 month shy of the 6 months where they're a little bit more understanding. I've used the same pharmacy for years. They know me, and I forgot it. And I was told, no, like you need to come back with your ID. I don't live in the city. I live outside of the city. It's a big trip. And I said, okay, like I understand why this is in place. I said, however, is there a way, like tomorrow I won't have my medication and I need to work tomorrow. Is there a way that we can do this? And essentially they pulled the pharmacist aside. Sorry, I'm realizing this is still a little bit of a triggering story for me. This was Christmas, like just before Christmas, right? Like it was the 22nd or something like that. And we had a family dinner. So there was no way in my schedule to make this work for me. And the pharmacist, when I said, okay, like, is it, like, I know I'm really close. He said, no, I am not. And his voice got quite loud. There are people all around me. This is a controlled substance. And instantly I started to shake, right? Like I'm getting nervous. Everyone's looking at me as if I am abusing this medication that I need to be able to function effectively and help all the people that I do. And so I started to shake and I started to cry and had to go through my box breathing. And I said, whoa, like you're just totally enforcing this stigma. And he said, well, I'm not putting my license on the line. Again, loud enough for everyone to hear. And so that is me. I'm, as I said, I've attended the same pharmacy for years. And I know that there are going to be situations where people lose their ID, where, these situations happen for other people. And that completely undid me for the day. And so I'm just wondering, like, not just the community, but as far as our medical professionals go, right? So not just the doctors who are going to be prescribing these things or mental health practitioners, if we're going to allow for that further down the line, or, how do we, it's still very alive. And ADHD medication has been around for a really long time. It took me a long time to be comfortable with even taking that myself and not feel like I am less than to take something that has been around for a long time. So with something new, I suspect that bigger things like this are going to happen. And not everyone knows the skill of box breathing and how to kind of try to ground yourself so that you don't become a puddle in a store. And so, especially when it comes to something that they really, really need, likely that moment, not even the next day, right? And so just wondering, kind of our ideas and thoughts around that, because I know it's a big one. Obviously, there's a lot of work to do still, even around, the decriminalization of marijuana, like even asking my doctor about that. Oh, like, hey, like now that I'm taking this, like, can I, like, what does recreational use look like?
A little though?
Yeah, and he's like, no, just not even no, not like how to do it safely, or Lisa, let's wait until, it's months after, before you think about going to have a smoke at a party, and it's like, oh, okay, like, no. So have I ever brought it up again? No, right? And that's me, who I feel like I can advocate most of the time for myself, right? And so these kind of themes just come to mind in how I've had to navigate through the systems. And I am really, really fortunate you know, to be in the position that I am and to have the communication skills that I do and to finally be at baseline, you know, and that's not everyone's story. So just wondering kind of your thoughts on that. Thank you for the, sorry for the long-winded question.
Thank you for that.
So it's interesting.
Thank you.
Now, I know Prairie Harm Reduction and Kayla DeMong, the executive director, they are offering educations to professionals.
Yes.
And I did do an episode with Kayla DeMong about that, and I called it "How Not to Be an Asshole to People Who Use Drugs." So you can find it on our YouTube channel.
100%.
Go ahead.
Oh gosh, yeah. No, and thank you so much for sharing that story and that vulnerability. And it really drives home the point, right, around stigma, access, all of the themes that we've been talking about today and reflected in, a prescription model. There should be mechanisms for the emergency provision of medications that are needed, particularly during holiday seasons and so on. So I'm very, very sorry to hear that this was your experience. That's not appropriate healthcare, and that's not okay to be that judgmental. But we also hear in that stigma, everyone in this audience, right? What did it do? Cut off access to healthcare, blocked that conversation with the care provider. It's no longer an option. And what good has that done? None. So we need to foster these conversations in a different way and enhance the education and training of our care providers so that they're not fearful of losing their license for things that they won't lose their license for, so that they're completely clear on what the scope of practice is that they're expected to perform in their role, and what the mechanisms are should they encounter a barrier in their scope of practice. Can they refer that person? Is there a way to vouch for this individual's identity, right? When we go to vote in an election, you can vote. Like, you can have someone who lives next door, if you don't have ID, say, yes, this is who they say they are, who they say they are. Could we have a similar process in our prescription mechanisms, right? So really, it's about building ways to say yes to patient need rather than professional standards blocking the care in healthcare. That's not the goal. There is a deficiency in training in our medical schools and across our continuum of care. There's simply not, my understanding now is that basically if you want to study substance use or addictions medicine, this is an individual's initiative that they can take for additional training, but it is not part of the core curriculum in our medical schools. That has got to change. Substance use crosses all fields of health. Without any kind of boundary. So it's really important that our medical professionals have that information so they're not basing their decisions on stereotypes and stigma. I don't want a healthcare provider who has only watched Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas and is using that to understand drug use, right? So we want people who are working in our health professions that have this knowledge. And this is where I should plug the graduate certificate in substance use health and well-being that is launching in the School of Public Health this fall. But I do know that enhanced curriculum is also coming forward from the College of Medicine shortly to enhance and bolster that training of our medical providers, and that there are many opportunities for continuing education in our communities as well for those healthcare providers. And maybe some conversation can be had between people who use substances and people who provide services for people who use substances. Maybe we can get that conversation going. Thank you so much again for sharing that story. I so appreciate it.
Okay, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I see we have a couple of people wanting to make a comment. The floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Kathy. I was an addiction counselor for 15 years, and now I work for CMHA. One of the things I worked a lot with was with methadone clients. Some of the methadone clients were coming off the opioids, but I had clients that were using it to come off methadone, opioids, because they had been on prescription, and they came off prescription and they were addicted. So they were using the methadone approach, and how some of them were treated by the pharmacists and was deplorable. I actually had to call one of the pharmacies and talk to the head pharmacist because it was just horrific. So they need mandatory training, because all pharmacists need mandatory training, and they're going to be given more duties, I read recently. So they need to know more about this, because it is really affecting so many people. And they look at the opioid crisis that we have and people that wanted to get in there and use methadone. This just creates barriers and really bad feelings because they're in there and they're treated, even if it doesn't matter why they're treated like second-class citizens. And they should be, praised because they're trying to do something to better their lives.
100%.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
100%.
Definitely.
I just want to applaud that. 100%. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Do you have anything in response to that very quickly? I'm sorry, we're going to run out. We're out of time. If there are any more questions, please feel free to, Barb and I and Donna will be at our booth over there. Happy to answer any questions or hear any comments. If you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube right now, leave us a comment. You can get at us at the Hard Knocks Talks Facebook page. Send us a private message. We'll be happy to do the best we can to answer your questions. Barb, do you have any final thoughts?
Let's keep advocating together and bringing better enhanced services to people who use substances right here in Saskatchewan and all across this country. We can make this change. Have the courage to stand up for what's right for the people that you serve every day. And don't forget to listen to people who use drugs about what policies are most important to them.
And watch Hard Knocks Talks.
And that.
All right.
Thank you all so
everybody.
much. Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Bart, for joining us today.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you,
me.
Faith, for inviting us and facilitating this wonderful space for us to share our message. And that's it.
All the
Take
time.
care, everyone. We'll see you again.
Thank you all.
Say, this is Hard Knocks Talks.